Hi, this is Liam Conroy, and I'm just doing a short presentation on the learning environments at Hope Street Charter Academy. So some of the general trends that I noticed when observing the different learning environments at Hope Street Academy, in general, most of our school is a little bit on the older side, and many of the classrooms are smaller, but that doesn't mean that the space isn't well utilized. The furniture is often hodgepodge. We're not the primary focus of the district, and so we kind of have to take what we can get in certain cases. And there's often a section of tower PCs on one side of the wall, and this happened so many times that I chose not to devote individual slides to it, but to enable some students, even though we have the one-to-one Chromebook program, if there's a student who doesn't have their Chromebook at a particular time and a classroom doesn't have Chromebooks that the student can borrow, they can move to the desk section with the tower PCs. This also does allow for some of our students, since we have a high rate of students with anxiety in our particular student population, to sometimes have an area that's kind of off-center, somewhere where they can be a little bit more private, if that's what they desire. So I decided to divide this by department, since I noticed some tendencies that were similar within the same department, but within different classrooms. So for the English classrooms, I'd noticed that the general arrangement allows for independent reading and for the instructor to move easily through the desks. There are also usually multiple seats for group activities, understandably if students are reviewing each other's papers or if they're all reading parts from a certain selection, they need to be close to one another in order to be able to do this effectively. You can see that not all of the chairs in the room necessarily face the projectors. There's a lot of different angles in which students can sit and a lot of different desk arrangements. Also prominent on the boards of a lot of the English department walls were student accomplishments, so various works that they've done that were kind of related to their studies within their programs, as well as, in at least one instance, some pictures of graduating students who I thought that was an interesting way to approach this topic, was to be able to show other students this is what you can achieve. This is something that if you apply yourself, you can be in the same spot as your peers in the future. Also, a lot of the English classrooms had little reading nooks, spaces near a selection of books that students could choose to sit and read in those spaces. I think there is scheduled reading time within the English department, but on top of that, if there's a student who's ahead on work and they are able to just go over to the reading nook to read in that area, it helps encourage that behavior. We only had one prominent family consumer science classroom that I took a couple of pictures on. It was a pretty standard desk arrangement, all of the desks designed to face the projector, but I know that not visible necessarily in these pictures, it is outfitted with a laundry room and space to allow wardrobe hangers to be brought into the room. I've seen them do units where they are doing a little bit more with clothing and in terms of management of it at home, and in those particular cases, those implements are also part of the classroom that enhance it somewhat. In the math department, I noticed that the spaces were very, very open, allowing the instructor to move between desks and often allow for seating of several students and sometimes room for a large drawing board, which again makes sense as you're working through different things in mathematics to be able to show the students what you're working with. As far as what teachers had selected to be on the walls, I noticed some of them were posters with helpful information for students, like how to solve certain equations or how to approach certain geometry problems, which I thought was very beneficial. There were also some displays that were a little bit more about the teacher themselves, that give the students a little bit more of a sense of that person and can help them connect on them, help to improve that student-to-teacher relationship. Finally, if we're looking at the science classrooms instead, we're actually very, very blessed in my department to have a new science wing, so a lot of these classrooms are a little bit more modern compared to some of the other ones at Hope Street. These are all newly furnished areas with these really bulky, easy to clean tables and lots of outlets for electricity to be hooked up for certain devices. And then there are also gas and air pumps that are inside all of the different science classrooms. There is specific equipment in particular for our one instructor who covers chemistry, so you can see that we do have a hood for any types of chemical experiments that would involve fumes. There's also desks that are arranged in such a way that they individually have sinks. There is an eye wash station within that particular classroom as well, so it's very well outfitted for safety concerns. As far as teacher selections in the science classrooms, one of my colleagues has a few posters that are devoted to lab safety and various little pieces on science that she teaches in her units. But what I also found fascinating was one wall that showed the different experiments that different groups were doing within her different semesters and different classes. It's something that students in other classes of hers can look to and say, oh, that's something I'd want to do on a different semester, or look what I accomplished on that particular day that I came to class. We do have a high truancy population at Hope Street, and I think things like this help to inspire students to come more often if they see what their peers are doing and they want to make sure that they're not left out on those occasions. Social studies, these setups were fairly similar to the English classrooms in terms of that kind of open space and varied desk arrangement, but the desks are arranged in such a way that students can more easily see one another. You can kind of see in the lower left-hand corner those two T shapes, and in the upper right-hand corner that large overall V shape. It makes it to where students are more easily able to talk to one another, which is good for classes where you're going to be more likely to run into a debate or a discussion that's taking place in class between peers. A lot of the walls in these classrooms had not only student work, but also artifacts, just either various posters or news clippings that were relevant to content in these areas, and certainly something that helps to enhance student learning. Looking at our visual art department, we actually have a very spacious visual art area, which is great for the students. There's several desks with computers for photo editing, as well as one large projection screen that our art teacher uses for those particular class segments when she has a photo that she's displaying to the entire class. There are also separate stations for various crafting and construction of other art projects, all in a just nice open space. It seems like it's very well designed for allowing students to have a creative edge. As you can see, a lot of their creations are also up on the walls as well, and this stuff rotates very, very frequently. I also wanted to look at some of the non-traditional learning spaces within Hope Street. So one of the ones that is actually very frequently used by our students is the library. Again, in some cases we have students that either because of high anxiety levels end up in the library, or sometimes they have a tutoring program that involves them being a little bit more one-on-one, where they interact directly with programs on a computer that are facilitated by our librarian. There's also lots of reference material in here that's very thoroughly organized, as well as just books that students are allowed to check out for leisure reading. Again, this helps to reinforce reading behaviors and make sure that they become a staple. There's a wide selection of DVDs that are available for teachers to utilize, and the PCs are varied on their functionality. Some of them have towers and drives that allow for students to connect various devices to them. Others are a little bit more simple and streamlined. It really is a very multifaceted learning space for lots of students to be able to perform work that they need to, especially in a more quiet area than some of our classrooms can be at times. Another non-traditional piece of Hope Street is the Parent-Child Learning Center. So many of our students end up at Hope Street Academy because they have children, very young children, either babies or toddlers, that they may not have the means to be able to make sure that there's someone looking after those children at home. So we have full daycare style staff basically that work in the Parent-Child Learning Center, but beyond those normal duties, they also help to teach basically family consumer science classes that are very focused on early childhood development that are beneficial for both students who find themselves in those positions and students who are contemplating that in the near future. Another non-traditional space that I wanted to analyze was the gymnasium. It's pretty standard gym as far as the equipment and the space, but it's also a space that we tend to do morning announcements. If we have an activity that requires a large open space, it's very central to the school and allows for it to be done easily. And it's also a demonstration of how student artwork is also displayed within the school in kind of unconventional places. As you can see on the walls, there's a lot of student art present there. Again, the art department is actually through that one little small doorway that you see in the upper left-hand picture. So art students don't have to travel far to create murals in the gymnasium, but it's just another nice feature that gives students some ownership over their space in Hope Street. Finally, the last non-traditional space I wanted to go to is one that I have some personal preferential bias towards, since it's one that I use in my horticulture classes. So this is our garden. Some time ago, Hope Street had put in grants for some raised beds in the back, and we've recently started to lay down mulch and fencing to kind of help protect it a little bit against weeds and pests that could get into the garden. Unfortunately, due to the early frosts this year, there isn't as much to show growing in the garden presently. The other interesting feature, besides the fact that this allows for a lot of outdoor, hands-on horticulture classes, is the wind turbine that you can see in the photo more on the right. This was actually put into place thanks to students from Hope Street Academy, basically changing part of local government proceedings about zoning with schools to allow a small wind turbine to be present at the school. It's not only a good sign of student achievement and what they can achieve in the classes here at Hope Street, but it's also a good jumping point for talking about alternative energy and wind power. Our school has always been a traditional competitor in the Kid Wind Challenges, and so this is yet another example of how we can have students take pride in that. So again, thank you for watching this presentation on the learning spaces at Hope Street Academy. I hope that it was a valuable analysis of them.